Hello, my bookish darlings! I have been wanting to do a Star Trek original series book tag, and I know there's some out there already. I have this great outfit. I'm all set, but I also kind of wanted to do a book tag where all the prompts are geared towards science fiction books. So let's go ahead and combine both of these ideas. This is the science fiction book tag Star Trek original series version, or something like that. I'll figure it out. You'll know by the title of this video. Anyway, who am I? I am the booktube goddess, the #1 drag queen booktuber on YouTube. Like many, but not all, science fiction fans, I started when I was young. I started in middle school with, of course, Edgar Rice Burroughs, but I moved on to the Heinlein juveniles. And in high school, I moved on to Heinlein's adult books. And of course, this set the stage for a lifelong interest in science fiction. But I was also an enormous fan of Star Trek, the original series. And I remember when it was the only science fiction on TV. It was it. It was just Star Trek. And there would be reruns that I would watch religiously. If Star Trek was running on a channel, I would make sure I was up and in front of that TV at that time, because there was no recording back then, to catch that episode. So for the first prompt, I wanted to give a nod to Yeoman Janice Rand. And she was the one with the fancy blonde hair that went up forever. And she was Captain Kirk's yeoman. She was meant to be Kirk's love interest when the series started, but of course they wanted Kirk to be the ladies' man and have lots of different love interests, and the actress was phased out. But she is one of the little-known characters on Star Trek, the original series, even though those of us who are big fans know her quite well. But the prompt is, what is a little-known science fiction novel that you wish people knew more about? Now, I was going to search my bookshelves because I have tons of books that no one has ever heard about or that are not well known. And I was thinking for this prompt to do a Mike Resnick book, but then I saw this book. This is The Way the World Ends by James Morrow. And I read this novel a while ago, but as soon as I see the cover, I have memories of reading it. This book probably hasn't aged that well since it's based on the Soviet-US conflict, the Cold War, but going up into World War III. But I think that actually makes this kind of interesting to read, especially for those who have lived through that period, but also as an educational device of what people's mindsets were back in the 80s. This was written in 1986, and I actually have the receipt here when I bought it from Stacy's bookstore. It cost $3.95. Do you remember when books cost $3.95? Let me know down in the comments. And while you're there, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Now, this book is a satire, and it is very much adjacent to Kurt Vonnegut. And I recognize the name James Morrow, but I can't think of anything else I've read by him. And I looked him up on Google, and he's written a number of books, and there are a lot of comparisons between him and Vonnegut. It is humorous, but very biting. It's about World War III, nuclear weapons, souls that will never be born because of the nuclear war, and justice for them, that type of thing. I think one of the last things I saw on Amazon that was published by him was a collaboration with Harry Turtledove and Cat Rambo about the future history of the United States as a totalitarian government under Donald Trump, which gives you an idea of his politics. Anyway, if you're a big fan of Vonnegut but haven't read anything similar to him, you might want to check out James Morrow. And if you're just interested historically in the Cold War and how people felt about it, this would be a very interesting book to pick up. And the next prompt is Pavel Chekov. Yes, Lieutenant Chekov, who is sort of the navigator, tactical officer on the bridge. He was brought in as to be a Davy Jones type, Davy Jones of the Monkees. He was young and attractive, and they gave him that haircut, or was it a wig? I don't know. But he was also very, very funny. He was nationalistic as far as Russia was concerned, saying everything great from Earth obviously originated in Russia.
There's an old saying on Earth, Mr. Sulu. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me.
I know this saying. It was invented in Russia.
So, what is your favorite humorous science fiction novel? For me, and probably a lot of you, it's going to be Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, published in 1979, written by Douglas Adams. When you say humorous science fiction, that's what most people are going to think about, and for good reason. It is so clever, in my opinion. It is so funny. And there's been several adaptations, but my favorite adaptation is probably the BBC version from the 80s, which is quite bizarre. And of course, there are other authors who have picked up the Douglas Adams torch, like John Scalzi, maybe. And by the way, Douglas Adams was a writer for Doctor Who, another one of my favorite science fiction shows. But if you are a science fiction fan and you haven't read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy yet, what are you waiting for? The next prompt is Nurse Chapel. Nurse Chapel, I always loved her because she was in love with Spock, and I kind of was in love with Spock too. She was actually meant to be the first officer, which you could see in the menagerie, but apparently the network thought the public wasn't ready for a female first officer, so the actress, Majel Barrett, who later married Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, was given the role of Nurse Chapel and also the computer voice. But as Nurse Chapel, she turned out to be a fairly strong female character. So, what science fiction novel has a great main female or non-male character? For me, I'm going to pick Station Eternity by Muir Lafferty, published in 2022 and was one of my top picks of 2022. It features a sentient space station, several very interesting aliens, including a rock alien and a hive mind of wasps aliens. But the main character, Mallory Viridian, is fantastic, even though she has a plague of murders around her, which is part of the mystery of the novel. This is the first time I've read anything by Muir Lafferty, and I was quite impressed, and I think you might be as well. The next prompt is Sulu. Yes, Lieutenant Hikaru Sulu, the helmsman or navigator, one of my heroes growing up, because I didn't see that many Asian representation, and I'm Asian if you don't know. Anyway, Sulu was the navigator. So the prompt is, what science fiction novel is notable about how they handle space travel? Now, most science fiction novels that deal with space travel usually have some version of hyperspace, and there are a lot of interesting variations or spins on how hyperspace works. My favorite, however, is The Void Captain's Tale by Norman Spinrad, published in 1983. And I haven't read it in a long, long time, and I have a feeling it might be problematic now, but basically, travel through hyperspace is accomplished through a woman who is somehow plugged into a spaceship, but the only way a ship can go into hyperspace or the void is when the woman reaches orgasm. It is bizarre. It is a bizarre novel. I'm not sure if it's problematic or not nowadays. If you know, let me know. But it was so memorable to me. And Norman Spinrad is a big name in science fiction. So maybe you want to give this one a try. Do your own due diligence research if you're concerned about if it's problematic or if there are triggers or whatever. But I remember being fascinated by it, amused by it, and horrified all at once. The next prompt is Lieutenant Uhuru, who is, of course, the Chief Communications Officer aboard the Enterprise, and many people find her their favorite character for good reason. Nichelle Nichols is fabulous. But since we are talking about communications, and communication is often a very important theme in science fiction, what is your favorite science fiction novel that deals with communication as the main theme? I'm going to pick another kind of obscure book, The Stone Garden by Mary Rosenblum in 1994. It was nominated for Hugo, and I believe she passed away at a relatively youngish age, so she hasn't published many works. But The Stone Garden deals with these special rocks or a special type of asteroid that people find, that when certain sculptors create art with it, they can imbue these sculptures with emotions. And the artists, of course, have trained themselves to imbue complex emotions within these rocks. So it's a pretty interesting story, especially when all the artists start dying and we have a few questions about what these rocks actually are. If you are interested in obscure science fiction or science fiction authors, why don't you give The Stone Garden a try? And let me know what you think. The next prompt is Scotty, the Chief Engineer. And let's just get right into some of the fascinating engineering feats that science fiction authors have come up with. And I am talking about megastructures, also known as big dumb objects in the Encyclopedia of Science Fiction. We're talking about Dyson spheres, space elevators, that kind of thing. So the question is, what is your favorite science fiction novel that has a megastructure? And you know what mine is. Yes, it is Ringworld by Larry Niven, published in 1971. If you don't know, Ringworld is a massive ribbon that circles the sun, and there is a smaller one within that has panels to mimic night and day on the interior of the ring. And I've talked about Ringworld before, and if you're a science fiction fan, you probably know it already. But there are a lot of other science fiction books that feature megastructures. I want to hear what yours are. The next prompt is Dr. McCoy, or Bones. Everyone loves McCoy. But we also know that biology sometimes features in science fiction. So the question is, what is your favorite science fiction novel with biological or medical science as a main theme? And my mind immediately went to clones. And I was thinking of Imperial Earth by Arthur C. Clarke. But my favorite is Cytine by C.J. Cherryh, published in 1989. Now, I'll be honest, because I've recommended this book to several people before. Not everyone likes Cytine. Some people do think it is slow-paced, and there's not that much action, which maybe is true. But I loved the story. I absolutely fell in love with Cytine. And I think the story is fascinating. It's about this woman, Emery, who is a genius who pretty much runs Mars. This is in C.J. Cherryh's Union Alliance universe. But Emery suddenly dies and things go to pot. So people want to clone her, to bring her back. But it's not enough just to clone the body. You have to duplicate all the events in a person's life. So they clone Emery, and as she is raised by her handlers, they try to duplicate all the events of the original Emery's life, including tragic events. So it's very interesting. Again, it is not a high-octane action. It is more psychological, and I think there's a lot of politics in it as well, sort of the planetary politics. But C.J. Cherryh is one of the big names of science fiction. If you haven't read anything by her before, maybe check out Citeen, or if this doesn't sound up your alley, maybe Foreigner. The next prompt is Mr. Spock, our favorite alien. Yes, I don't know if I was in love with Spock or I wanted to be Spock, but he was definitely one of my favorite characters of all time. But he was also an alien. So, what is your favorite alien in a science fiction novel? I'm going to have to go with Fire Upon the Deep by Vernor Vinge, published in 1992, because of the Tynes. And gosh, it'd almost be a spoiler to describe what the Tynes are. But let's just say when I first read the book, in the first chapter that described the Tynes, I couldn't put my mind around what I was reading, what this alien was actually like. And when it sort of solidified, it blew my mind. There's also some cool aliens in Fire Upon the Deep called the Scroters, which are like alien trees that ride around on sleds. They're cool as well. So I guess Fire Upon the Deep has some amazing aliens, which I think maybe even surpasses David Brin's Uplift War aliens, which I loved as well. But Fire Upon the Deep, fantastic science fiction novel. Highly recommend. Next prompt is Kirk, captain of the Enterprise. He leads the ship. So, what novel leads your love of science fiction? In other words, what novel really turned the table for you that made you fall in love with science fiction as a genre? For me, it's Dune by Frank Herbert, published in 1965. Of course, I read it in the 70s. How old do you think I am? But I also read it at the right age. I was around 15 or 16 at the time, around Paul Atreides' age. Maybe the era I read it, the 70s, played a role. But I completely identified with Paul Atreides. I was fascinated by him. I memorized the litany against fear, fear is a mind killer, all that. And there are just those books out there that you have to read when you're a certain age that stays with you the rest of your life. And for me, Dune was that book. Okay, that was the main crew, but there's one more prompt. Star Trek was known for some of their great villains, like Khan, the Klingons, the Tribbles, but my favorite villain is Harcourt Fenton Mudd. Harry Mudd, played by Roger Carmel, was a big, blustery bag of wind who caused the Enterprise quite a few problems, even though there was something lovable about him. By the way, if you didn't know, there was talk about doing a Harry Mudd movie, bringing Roger Carmel back to reprise his role, like they did with Ricardo Montalban in Wrath of Khan, but unfortunately Roger Carmel died, so that project never took off. Anyway, the question is, what novel has your favorite unconventional villain? For me, it is the Titan trilogy written by John Varley for the villain Gaia. Now, you may think of Gaia, the goddess of Earth, or Captain Planet, or whatever, but in Titan, the moon of Saturn, Titan, holds an entity named Gaia that calls herself Gaia, who is completely insane. Sometimes looks like a housewife, sometimes looks like a giant Marilyn Monroe. It is just fascinating. One of my favorite villains of all times. There is a lot of scenes involving sexual assault, which seems to be in a lot of the novels in the 80s. I don't know why, but if that doesn't bother you and you are interested in a wild science fiction story, check out Titan by John Farley. So, who should I tag? Well, since all these prompts are science fiction specific, why don't I go ahead and tag the entire Science Fiction Alliance? I'm not sure if they all do tags, but it'll be fun to find out. So let's go ahead and tag Fit to Be Read, Media Death Cult, Book Pill, The Library Ladder, and The Secret Sauce of Storycraft, and Word in Time. Of course, this tag is open to anyone. If you want to answer some of the prompts in the comments below, please feel free. Just don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Until we meet again, may you live long and prosper, and may all the books you read be blessed.